Thank you, everyone. Good morning. Welcome to day 9 of the Inquiry and Advisory Committee hearing for Kentbruck Green Power Hub Project Environment Effects Statement. This hearing is being audio recorded, as parties are aware. My name is Lisa Kendall and I'm Chair of the Inquiry and Advisory Committee appointed to consider the matter. I'm joined today in the room by Member Michael Kirsch on my left, Member Ken Joyner on my right, and Member Wilkinson is joining us online, and you can see he is online today. So today we'll continue to hear submissions from the proponent, including evidence on bushfire, and we'll move into cross-examination shortly, and we'll also be hearing from Mr. John Glossop on planning. As parties will be aware, we're not sitting tomorrow, but Monday next week we'll be hearing evidence on aviation from Mr. Jennings and noise from Mr. Dallaire. And just a reminder to parties, please let the Planning Panel's Victoria office know if you're intending to cross-examine those witnesses. We're working to document list 48. I won't run through the documents in any detail, but ask the proponent to please do so, as you have been doing when we come to you this morning. So those documents that have been received have been uploaded to the Engage Victoria website. In terms of, I can just see that we do have Mr. Tobin joining us online as well. So I'll just let you know that we can see you clearly. Thank you. And if you, the times that you're asking or that you're participating will have your camera on. Otherwise, you're welcome to leave your camera off.
Thank you, Member Kendall. Good morning. I'll just check to see that I can be heard within the room. You look as though you're nodding.
Yes, okay. It's working well. Thank you. So I don't have any other preliminary matters to cover this morning, but I'll come to you, Mr. Chessel, to see if you do.
Yes, good morning. Only to run through the documents that have been filed since yesterday. The first two both concern land use planning. We have the expert evidence summary presentation of Mr. Glossop, document 345, and the submissions, that is the opening submissions on land use planning, that is 346. For our part, the other documents that were filed were document 348, which is the CFA design guidelines that were referenced yesterday and referenced within the evidence statement of Mr. Taylor and Mr. Potter. 349 is what I believe to be the last remaining piece of the Coastal Spaces Landscape Assessment Study. That is the background report of or component of that study. The other two documents are documents relevant to Mr. Hark's evidence. The first is Mr. Hark's response to table document 304, that's document 350, and document 351 is the expert evidence presentation of Mr. Hark. That is the version that contained the edits that were presented to you yesterday.
Lovely, thank you very much. Does any other party have any matters that we need to discuss this morning or any questions? Mr. Tobin?
Thank you, Member Kendall. Just one matter, and it's for information purposes only. We have foreshadowed that we might have questions.
We've just got some disturbance with the audio. Just get you to try again.
How's that now?
Good for the moment. Yeah, I'll let you know if there are any issues.
Thank you. We had foreshadowed that we would be somewhere between, I think, 30 and 45 minutes with Mr. Glossop. We've been working in order to provide for an efficient hearing to refine our questions along the way. We think will be a much shorter period with Mr. Glossop on the assumption that his evidence closely follows his statement and his summary. So we think it'll be more in the order of about 10 minutes. And we just let the committee know in terms of that, in case that influences your timing of breaks and so forth along the course of the hearing.
Lovely. Thank you very much, Mr. Tobin. And I did fail to mention that at the end of the day yesterday. So thank you for that and the clarification around timing. So at this stage, we anticipate for Mr. Glossop, there will be questions from, sorry, would you mind reminding me, Mr. Tobin, is that from DECA or Parks Victoria?
They will be questions on behalf of Parks Victoria.
Parks Victoria, thank you. And the IAC will be the only other parties questioning Mr. Glossop. Thank you. And just checking my screen for a moment. Doesn't look as though there are any hands up, so I'm happy for us to move straight into this morning's proceedings. We were at the point we're about to do questions, but I'll just check with you, Mr. Chessel, if you're happy for us to move into those.
Yes, we're happy to move to cross-examination. After that, we propose to walk you through the submissions that we prepared for this topic and then move to land use.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So welcome again to Mr. Potter and Taylor. Thank you for coming back today. First, Member Joyner will ask a couple of questions and then Member Wilkinson will, and then I have a few questions as well. So I'll hand you first to Member Joyner. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Taylor, in Appendix V of the Bushfire Risk Assessment and Mitigation Plan, there's a reference to, on page 58, PDF page 58, 53, I beg your pardon. I can read it out. It's just a quick question to clarify lighting on towers. The paragraph that I'm interested in says, record these towers in the tall structures database maintained by Air Service Australia and install warning lights or visible markers such as orange balls on all masts to minimise risks during aerial firefighting. Now, Mr. Wright yesterday made reference to the fact that there will be no lighting. Can I just clarify the situation with respect to the lighting in particular? Are there going to be lighting on towers or not?
It's our experience that most tall structures do have aviation warning lights. Whether that is applicable in this regard to this development, I can't say definitively. It's not my area of expertise, but I'm just clarifying that our experience is that most large structures from a flight safety point of view do have lights on them.
Yeah. That's my understanding as well. I just wanted to clarify.
Yeah.
Are we lighting?
There is no lighting proposed.
Okay.
We'll hear next week from Mr. Jennings, and he's the aviation safety expert.
Yep. And
he'll explain why in this case that's not necessary for safety reasons.
Thank you. Thank you. The submission 167 from the CFA states a concern about potential radio interference from turbines and associated infrastructure. And in your presentation and in your expert evidence, you say that that's not necessary, but you make the statement that studies have not determined that there is any interference with emergency service radio communications. Do you have a reference to that study or a study that we can...
No, we don't, other than what's been relayed to us from both wind farm operators for wind farms currently in operation in Victoria, particularly Western Victoria, but also our discussions, regular discussions with the emergency services. We understand anecdotally that similar to concerns around aviation and fire suppression and wind turbines, that there's been some concerns about radio interference, particularly for the state fire fleet. You know, the radios that are in plantation vehicles, forestry vehicles and CFA vehicles. But we've certainly seen no evidence presented to us or information that's been relayed to us from the emergency services or the operators that this actually occurs.
Okay. Well, I've got responsibility to write up the electromagnetic interference section as well. And if we could at least get a standard that when CFA source radios, that they have to comply with immunity standard XYZ, that would be helpful.
Yeah. Mr. Potter?
If I can also add to that, Member Joyner, just in relation to, probably we didn't clearly articulate that in our witness statement in terms of responding to CFA's comments. So on page 16, 17 of our expert witness statement, where we responded individually a whole range of matters that CFA had raised, within the correspondence from CFA, that indicated that it was matters that have been raised by their members on repeated occasions. So it wasn't given us to that it was an issue for this project. It was just saying that our members raise these matters on a regular basis because they required understanding of that. So hence why we responded to those to assist CFA to say that we've considered all these things, these matters. So certainly in the body of the CFA correspondence submission, it didn't indicate that that was a concern for them. It was just a communicating from their members that these are the matters they've raised on regular occasions.
So there are studies or standards to which the radios, the comm system have to comply with. Yep.
Yep.
If we could just be notified of
Yeah.
those, that would be helpful.
Understood.
The other thing, Mr. Taylor, in your presentation yesterday, you made reference to lightning dissipators to be fitted. These are not ionising sources, like they're not hard radiation cobalt 137 sources that sit to produce the ionisation in the air, are they? They're not using a hard radiation source.
My understanding is no, they're not. They're hard metal fixed source lightning conductors, lightning rods, but not of that variety that you've described, no.
Okay. Thank you. I just have one other point of clarification. The 50-metre radius of clear earth, crushed rock, etc., presumably that in the maintenance plan, there will be a clearing, statement that refers to the clearing to make sure that this is maintained. I just want to make sure we're not going to be using, or you're not going to be using poisonous herbicides to keep
that's correct, Member John. Certainly, that's influenced by other studies and other arrangements to ensure that they can maintain that within the realms of other requirements of the approvals. Yes.
I was going to say we might ask the proponent to come back to that on us once we've heard from everybody around where that might be landing in terms of mitigation measures.
Yes, I've made a note of that one.
Thanks.
Thank you, Member Kentbruck. That's all.
Thank you, Member Joyner. Member Wilkinson, I'll hand to you for your questions.
Thank you, Member Kendall. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, all good. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Good morning, gentlemen. Several submissions raised concerns about the capabilities of the local CFA in terms of the resources they have available, but also their capability to fight a fire in a nacelle, assuming the fire suppression systems did fail. And to recognise what you told us yesterday about the systems that are proposed to be in place. And partly in response to that, Neoen has indicated that they plan to train their own crew in firefighting, which will, I guess, help with the capability gap a bit. But can you comment on whether you think that the resources to fight a fire in a nacelle are adequate in the area, and also how you would go about doing that, given it's some 175 metres above ground level. I assume that it will be somewhat difficult or extremely difficult to directly attack a fire. So is it a matter of just waiting for it to burn out and ensuring that it doesn't sparks don't cause a fire in the surrounding area, or how would you go about that?
So, thank you. There's a range of answers to give to, I suppose, that question. So, I'll start off first with about the response strategy that would be proposed for a fire within a turbine, and fully acknowledging all those matters you raised around height off the ground, the dangers of approaching a tower when there is a fire above you, and certainly the understanding that we have, and certainly would be our view, in our opinion, is that that fighting fires, once there's flames emanating from the turbine tower or the nacelle, then there is no firefighting that's occurred. The design of those systems is to then stand back and let them burn. Now, that's consistent with a range of other infrastructure that may cause similar risks, where firefighters would generally not approach and undertake any form of active fire suppression, including terminal stations through to residential power infrastructure, batteries, all those sorts of infrastructure. Certainly firefighters have been trained and have policy and doctrine in place that requires them not to approach those devices purely because of the risks associated with those. And there is certainly a defensive firefighting strategy that is then undertaken. And we would see that this would be the case as well. In terms of I just want to quickly touch on the capacity. Certainly there's a unique situation in this geographical part of Victoria due to the extent of plantation companies now acknowledging that the plantation companies have requirements to operate firefighting services under the Country Fire Authority Act as an industry brigade. And a number of plantation companies across Victoria are obligated through that legislation when they reach certain thresholds in size over a geographical area, they're required to provide equipment and trained resources and be registered as CFA members to provide that service, and then they're regularly audited. That's in addition to the Forest Fire Management Victoria resources plus the CFA volunteers. So in this case, the initial responders will likely be the plantation companies, just due to the remoteness of the locations, who would be operating within those geographical areas on a regular basis. So in terms of the response, certainly also add that if a fire did occur or a threat of fire occurred whilst the operators were inside the nacelle, certainly the standards require them to have the ability to self-evacuate. That's either through the entry point through the turbine tower, but also they will be equipped and trained that if at worst case scenario, they provide the ability to abseil off the rear of the nacelle. So that is certainly an obligation that's imposed through a range of requirements under work health and safety requirements to ensure that they've got that ability to self-evacuate. So in summary, we're certainly not advocating acknowledging, hence why we're very focused on ignition prevention and understanding the ability for these systems to early detect faults that may, if they go unattended, may result in a fire ignition, through to that if a fire ignition does occur, that we have some ability to, in attempt to extinguish that fire through the gas suppression system, but also some early detection of smoke that then allows the technicians in conjunction with the fire agencies to decide whether they do make an attempt to enter the nacelle to undertake any form of activity that they may see as safe enough to do so. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Just one other question. There's a substantial fire break along the Nelson-Portland Road through the plantations, which is also where the power line is proposed to go. In the event of a fire in that area, I assume that power line could be isolated and shut down. Is that your expectation? And do you have any concerns about a power line through the fire break?
Our expectation would be that during fire suppression operations on the Nelson-Portland Road, that if required, that power line could be isolated. There are restrictions on and current work practices within CFA and forest fire management on how to operate around power line infrastructure during heavy smoke conditions. And we know under the heavier smoke conditions that smoke can transfer electricity to the ground and arc out to the ground. So it's an adequate break in terms of our assessment. It's well maintained, but if they were operating on that break during fire suppression operations, we would expect that there would be electrical isolation occurring along that easement. That's correct.
All right. Thank you. Now the questions.
Thank you. Thank you, Member Wilkinson. So I have a few questions to run through with you as well. Firstly, I'm just going to, I've got them grouped up, but there's a couple of initial questions I need to just confirm. So your paragraph, your expert witness statement, paragraph 91, you talk about an expert doing the Phoenix modelling an external contractor, and I just couldn't see who that was, or if that was documented somewhere either in your statement or in the bushfire response plan either. Is that something you're able to advise who that was?
Yes, Madam Chair. The expert we utilised for the Phoenix fire predictive modelling was a gentleman by the name of Mr. Greg McCarthy.
Yeah.
He's a recipient of an Australian Fire Service Medal, worked for Forest Fire Management for over 50 years, and is seen as one of the states, if not Australia's leading predictive fire behaviour experts. And he works periodically as part of our team on projects similar to this.
Okay, thank you. And just to clarify, so he wasn't an author of the plan, but he provided data that you analysed and integrated into the plan.
That's correct, Madam Chair.
Okay, thank you. In terms of, I've got a few questions around the CFA submission. So you've indicated that you did have discussions with the CFA following receipt of their submission. And I know that we will be hearing from the CFA in the next few weeks, but could you just advise if there were any points that you were not able to agree on in those discussions with the CFA?
In terms of the initial meeting that we held with CFA in response to their submission, of which we've addressed within our witness statement, no, I'm pretty confident that we've had the discussion was that we drew their attention to certain parts of the report, and certainly indicated that we were comfortable that was there. I don't think we got any significant or any pushback from those discussions, in particular at that stage. One of the things I should also just mention, I suppose the conversations are within the realms of understanding that that the normal process through these is because we don't have, and nor does any project at this stage have their equipment supplier determined as yet. Certainly CFA, through the various approval processes, will actively pursue a sort of a second round engagement. So certainly within our experience in Victoria, when we write risk management plans or bushfire risk assessments, that at an early stage of a project such as this, once the equipment supplier is then determined who that is, we then go back and update those plans to reflect the equipment supplier's fire safety design solution. Does that meet what we originally intended as the management of risk? And certainly that then opens up a further consultation opportunity with CFA. So when we engage with CFA, I won't speak on behalf of CFA, but certainly we have an understanding that there's still a second go at this in terms of once we've got that that better understanding of what the fire safety design elements are and the preventative elements are of a particular manufacturer's technology. So I'll flag that. In terms of the most recent engagement with CFA in response to the email that we mentioned yesterday, and we understand that they will talk to this when they appear in front of the IAC. Certainly, I don't think there's any disagreement, but certainly they've indicated a desire to consider the issue of blade fall. And
of what? Sorry, I missed that.
Sorry,
the issue of
blade fall.
Blade fall.
Yeah. So, which is what occurred recently at a fire in Victoria, and we then had further discussions about how we could potentially address that either now or in the future. So I don't think we landed the conversation other than, you know, we again work through the process as we have with the IAC, is outlining our design in terms of what we're proposing based on the 50 metres, plus all the other requirements that we're suggesting are placed on the operator to manage that fire risk. CFA have indicated that they have got the statement. It's not a model requirement, but certainly a statement within their guideline that alludes to one of the options is to manage to the blade width, of which we've indicated that we believe our fire safety design is suitable and is offsetting those risks. But certainly there are some other opportunities that we could potentially explore once we get into that call it secondary consent process to better understand the fire safety design of the equipment in accordance with the manufacturer's requirements.
Thank you. So the equipment supply that you just were referring to and the opportunity for further conversations, could you just be clear about specifically which equipment you're referring to?
In terms of the nacelle, so the wind turbine itself, yeah. So that's the key piece of infrastructure that we're focused on about managing ignition risk.
Thank you.
Is the turbine, including the nacelle.
Okay, thank you. I do have a couple of other questions about that, but I'm going to come to them in a moment. Just in relation to the CFA submission, they have indicated that they may facilitate their own bushfire modelling that they may present to the IAC. Is it your understanding that they're likely to still do this?
Certainly the indication we've received is that they were planning to do that. They certainly have internal capabilities to do that work. It will utilise the same modelling system that we accessed, but certainly they didn't give an indication that they weren't going to, so yeah.
Okay. And could you explain your understanding of why they were intending to do this?
Madam Chair, the CFA regularly undertake modelling for most private land in Victoria to inform risk management plans, future planned burn strategies, asset protection zones, further incorporation of the bushfire management overlay. So our understanding of why they would do this would be as part of their normal risk management and their normal modelling for the Kentbruck area. We certainly haven't received any advice from CFA that it would be project-specific modelling to the Kentbruck wind farm, but I suppose that's a question that they'll be able to confirm with you.
Yeah. Thank you. That's clear. You've discussed a couple of times the asset protection zone and the CFA potentially looking for that to be different to what's proposed in the draft or in the ES. Are you able to provide any indication of the process for resolving that and the timing of that final advice from the CFA and how it might be responded to?
I think that the process to us, that's I think that's the tough question to answer. I think in terms of the process, but certainly in our view, we will continue to engage with CFA. In particular, providing further guidance or advice or information that we've sourced through the development of our risk assessment, our risk assessment work. So we'll certainly do that. We'll provide opportunities to, if possible, engage with turbine manufacturers to provide a bit more detail and information to CFA if they choose to take that up. I think the process is about where to do this. Technically, I think to some extent historically this would have been the secondary consent process, but we were very keen to indicate quite strongly through the start of this assessment that we felt that the 50-metre separation distance was a really critical piece of fire safety solution to manage that risk, and we felt that the 50 metres was providing suitable protection for both to the asset itself, but also to eliminating or limiting the risk of fire starting within the turbine and spreading from the turbine into the adjacent plantation. Certainly we can't eliminate that completely, but we're certainly managing that to a higher standard. And then of course we talked about all the other elements. So in terms of the finalisation, I'd like to think that we could have further discussions with CFA leading into their presentation of the IRC, just to ensure that they've got access to all the data that we have. But in terms of where the final decision is made, I'm not sure that I can answer that.
That's fine. Thank you very much. And as I indicated a moment ago, Mr. Tesler, it's something that I'm confident the proponent will come back to us at an appropriate time, noting there's a number of considerations around that, thinking about the search area for fauna that we were discussing earlier in the week and maintenance and other things. But I'm happy to leave that with you to come back to us.
We can come back to you, though. We should make quite clear that our position is the separation distance proposed, that is the area with a radius of 50 metres around the base of each turbine, is the appropriate area, that is to address the risk posed by
bushfire, and we rely upon the evidence of Mr Taylor and Mr Potter in that regard. And we separately sought to address you as to how it's possible to ensure that mortality monitoring in that type of context can probably be undertaken. So our position is that that is the correct area. That is the area that should properly be required. And we can respond to any submissions if they're made to the contrary. But
thank you. No, that's clear.
Our position is as stated. Thank you.
Thank you. I've just got a few more questions to run through with you. The CFA submission states that there may be a need to strengthen bushfire mitigation response beyond the levels in the general guidance. Your statement clearly says that it does go above the standard guidelines, and that's something I imagine that you've discussed with the CFA, but I'm interested to just be clear that when you discussed that with the CFA, were they satisfied with the response that you've provided? And obviously they can tell us, so you please don't need to speak on behalf of the CFA, but any areas that of concern, I'd just be interested to know.
Madam Chair, they were particularly interested in terms of how the proponent would train and equip its staff. Any addition to a firefighting force is always welcome, and traditionally, within wind farms in the grassland environment in Victoria, quite often the proponent would not provide fire suppression equipment that would be, utilised by their staff and trained by their staff. So, firstly, the CFA were very interested in that as an added bonus to the existing forest fire management CFA and the dozen odd plantation companies. They're very positive on that, and we've received some great feedback on that. The second one that they're particularly interested in too was the fragmentation we alluded to of the existing plantation estate. Obviously, CFA will speak to this, but collectively, as we mentioned yesterday, the plantation, in our expert opinions, is considered very well managed based off the resource that it's providing to Western Victoria and the southeast of South Australia. CFA were very interested in how further roads and tracks and access points would benefit fire response, and we understand they've reviewed in detail what the roads into each turbine footprint looks like, their width, and how they'll be managed as a future fire control line. So they were very supportive of that, and also those tracks being maintained for the life of the wind farm. Yep.
Thank you. And just for my understanding, the intent around strengthening the bushfire mitigation response, could you just explain the reason why they were focused on that?
I think it's a simple. No, I shouldn't say it's as simple as, but it's related to the reasoning that the development is within a plantation.
Yeah. Okay.
And that's not a common occurrence. This is in our understanding, it's probably the second one in Victoria that's been or proposed to be developed. So and certainly that's indicative within the CFA guidelines that's a key requirement that developments within what I think they talk about low risk, or I think is the term they use within the guidelines. This is certainly not a low risk landscape, and certainly the guidelines, whilst they don't exclude the consideration of a development within that landscape, they certainly acknowledge that there's additional considerations that need to occur. That is certainly, that I suspect that is the driver for that conversation.
Thank you. And any consideration around climate change, and is that something that you've taken into consideration as well, and how's that responded to in the plan?
The state has modelled, Madam Chair, climate change and what it means for fire suppression. Broadly speaking, climate change is having an effect within the fire protection industry with longer fire seasons. So, traditionally in Victoria, fire seasons were December, January, February. Now, under certain conditions, they could start in October and run through to late March, April. Climate change is also having an effect, and this is picked up in the studies with the fuel being available longer, hence the longer fire seasons. And also from a point of view of what we'd consider fire weather, the amount of days that are available for a fire to start and move through the landscape. So although our report didn't specifically deal with linking this to Victoria's climate change strategy, we are fully cognizant of the fact that the number of days that the state will face in the future with some difficult fire weather and are increasing.
And in terms of how that's addressed for the project, do you how is that addressed in terms of the way the mitigation measures are expressed for the project?
Madam Chair, I believe that the greatest asset in terms of the response phase, we'll leave the prevention and preparedness planning aside for the moment, but the greatest way that can help you manage is a wind farm operator that is geared up every day of the year to respond to fires. This puts less pressure on the CFA brigades to respond. It puts less pressure on the forestry brigades. We know they're going to respond anyway because we consider all fires now in Victoria essentially fires of mutual interest. They don't belong to one agency or another. All fires are seen as a collective fire response. So the best way that can be tackled from a response point of view is to have a wind farm operator that has capability, internal capability. It's within their interest to keep these fires small should they start. They want to be a good neighbour to their surrounding assets, being the plantation company. So we believe that a wind farm operator in pine plantation providing fire response is essentially a game changer to what the industry's essentially experienced in the past. And we felt very comfortable recommending that, but based off the fact that the wind farm was being proposed in plantation and also based off our experience with the previous Delburn project and how that was received not only by CFA but by local communities as well. Yeah.
Thank you. Just moving into a couple of specific questions about your expert statement. I know that you've talked to the guidelines, the CFA guidelines, in your statement and during your evidence. The Appendix V says it refers to the version from 2022, but I note that the updated version, which has been tabled, is an August 2023 version. And my question is whether you have reviewed and compared the documents, whether there are any differences and whether any updates are required as a result.
To apologise for that, Madam Chair, the CFA guidelines do undergo regular updates, and that's an acknowledgement of the rapid changes that are occurring across the renewable energy sector. We've certainly undertaken that review, but the changes primarily to that guideline result of battery-related matters, because that is the industry that is evolving rapidly. Certainly the wind farm guidance has remained fairly static now for some time within that guideline. And in fact, the guidelines' original origins was wind farms, because that's where CFA members were raising concerns about. So, but that's remained fairly static. So at this stage, I'm very confident that there's been no changes in relation to this that would impact on this development within those guideline changes. Certainly the last 2 to 3 years.
Just going to jump to the mitigation measure for a moment. So BF06, the fire management plan, and it says the fire management plan, or the addition in the day one version says the fire management plan will be prepared in accordance with relevant CFA guidelines. Are they the guidelines that are being referred to in that, or are there other guidelines as well?
So it's the renewable energy guidelines.
Okay, and the way that it's phrased, the relevant CFA guidelines, is that to accommodate further updates to the guidelines?
That's correct.
So the intent is for it to be more of a living document
that's
because
correct,
it will be updated. Okay, thank you.
The documentation structure hasn't altered again. That's a section of the report that hasn't altered that much, but it is allowing that if there is a change that can be addressed within that process.
Okay, lovely. Thank you. just for my benefit, could you just explain paragraph 50? You talk about firebombing aircraft always only operate in daylight hours. Is that is still the case? Is it?
Yes, that's correct, Madam Chair.
Yeah. So it will. Do they operate at dusk and dawn as well, or is it just like what's the threshold there?
The majority of the state fleet firebombing aircraft have an operating period available between sunrise and sunset.
Yeah.
Based on pilot hours, because the pilots are capped at how many hours they can fly. The state, over the last few years, has embarked on night firebombing operations. They conducted a pretty significant trial over 3 years, and night firebombing has been incorporated, but it is not broad scale. It's based on a specific set of scenarios and safety measures for a specific event. But the majority of firebombing occurs during daylight hours, specifically for visual flight rules and safety. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. I've just now got a few questions relating specifically to the mitigation measures. And I note that in your witness statement, you have advised that you reviewed the day one EMF and you're satisfied with the changes, noting that yesterday in the presentation you advised of or suggested some repackaging of those recommendations or the mitigation measures.
Sorry, I missed the question.
So it's just confirming that you have reviewed the day one EMF and that you are satisfied with the changes subject to what you took us through yesterday with you, where you're suggesting the way in which the documents may be grouped.
That is correct, yes.
Okay, thank you. So, and just to be 100% clear, you're saying that all of the components that need to be in the mitigation measures to be consistent with the CFA guidelines are there, and your recommendations was more to do with the way in which they're presented in the EMF.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you. In section 8.1 of your statement, you don't need to go to it. Following the selection of the wind turbine manufacturer, further consideration for the design and construction phase, fire risk and further consideration. Sorry, I'm reading that verbatim. It's not quite flowing. I'm just going to go to my question. And it suggested that should be provided to the CFA for their review in terms of selection of the turbine manufacturer, which you discussed this morning in relation to another question. Could you just advise me whether you think that fire safety needs to be, as a consideration in turbine selection, should be specified anywhere in the EMF?
I'm just trying to recall whether it in fact is. So certainly, yeah, the trigger of the updated risk management plan, and in accordance with the CFA guidelines, I feel we'll do that anyway. There are certainly some requirements in the CFA guidelines about managing risk in the context of the landscape, and that relates back to any equipment, whether it's a battery, solar farm or wind turbine. And certainly there's an obligation through that process for us to demonstrate to CFA and ultimately in the future DTP that we've been through that process and that the risk has been effectively managed. So I feel it's there, and that process will automatically kick in, I suppose, based on past experience.
Okay, thank you. And we note your submissions or your evidence in relation to the Green Triangle activities and the current arrangements that are in place for firefighting and being coordinated. My question is whether the project is relying on some of those existing Green Triangle activities to ensure that the risk management is acceptable. And if so, there's a second part to the question that I will go to. Do the arrangements need to be secured or guaranteed in any way and built into the mitigation measures?
In answer to the first part of your question, Madam Chair, I would suggest that yes, the processes that the wind farm will implement will be integrated into the Green Triangle forest arrangements. It's essentially a collection of a dozen odd forestry companies, all with a stake in protecting their assets from fire. So yes, there will need to be integration and the continued management of that estate as it's being managed will complement activities within the wind farm. And sorry, just the second part of that question again, Madam Chair.
Just whether the arrangement needs to be built into any of the mitigation measures or approvals to be formalised.
There's certainly, Madam Chair, an opportunity to do that. We have discussed this as a team, and we think the best way to be able to achieve that would be to socialise the wind farm fire management plan. All the plantation companies are required to produce fire management plans as part of their annual cycle, which are audited by CFA. We think the primary mechanism for the wind farm to be incorporated in that process would be for them to produce the fire management plan as required under the CFA guidelines, but for that plan then to be socialised with essentially their neighbours, the forest companies. That in itself will lead to a greater appreciation of the operation of the wind farm, but also what the wind farm is doing within the context of the plantation to reduce risk.
Thank you. When you say socialise, can I just get you to be explicit about what that involves?
Sorry, Madam Chair, that's within the fire management world, we consider socialisation as being linked to a strategic committee. So the fire management of the Green Triangle, they meet regularly at a geographic location, whether that's Mount Gambier or Casterton or Portland, but they use those opportunities pre-season to integrate their plans. So we think, but by socialising, apologies, we mean that the proponent would have a seat at the table as a stakeholder to plantation fire management, and they would be able to detail their plans and incorporate them with the other companies. Yeah.
Thank you. And if I could just get you to clarify the role, you have explained that the plan would, in that circumstance, is generally audited by the CFA, but what role does the CFA usually play in advising and endorsing those management plans or management plans for a project such as this?
So traditionally, or normally based on other projects, the CFA they've done is contribute to the discussion through their submissions. So certainly that would be the case. Certainly CFA, in our understanding, is that they would have a consultation role in future in the development of future documentation. And then traditionally the endorsement piece then is undertaken by DTP through that process. So certainly all of the projects that we operate on within the CFA jurisdiction requires extensive engagement and consultation with CFA to ensure that they're satisfied that not just consulting, but they're satisfied with the ultimate design that's being proposed for that particular risk. We're also aware that, without speaking on behalf of CFA, we're also aware through some media coverage that Energy Safe Victoria are also increasing their auditing process in terms of oversight of the industry, and our understanding is that CFA are actively involved in that as well under the various jurisdictional or legislative obligations or abilities that they have in addition to that. So it's not just get us to the point of construction. there's an obligation to then do some work in support of operations. And then there's clearly some obligations on operators in a maintenance auditing regime in particular under Energy Safe Victoria.
Thank you. With the endorsement through DTP, which part of DTP and at what stage in the process does that occur?
I'm not sure that I can answer that, unfortunately, Madam Chair. No, I'm not aware of which. We could probably come back to you on that.
Thank you.
Yep.
Yeah. The CFA recommended consideration of the operations and management sites to be included in. So let me just read it. CFA recommends that further consideration of the operations and management sites be provided to ensure bushfire risks are adequately addressed. And then it talks about the principles of emergency management planning. My question is whether the mitigation measures, and probably specifically BF05, the emergency management plan, adequately addresses that request from the CFA for the consideration of the operations and management sites.
So certainly when we draft recommendations or mitigations for projects such as this at this early stage, and we obviously acknowledge we've been working on this project for a number of years now. Certainly there's a balance between being specific enough to give confidence that we've got management of the risk ongoing, but certainly there's also some needs to be generalised is probably not the right word, but certainly being a bit more broader to allow for whether it be the operator or CFA to then have further discussions about how we might manage that risk in a particular fashion. Certainly the emergency management planning mitigation controls that we've provided, I think have under that specific requirement of, I think, a construction and operational stage have a number of sub requirements under that. So we're certainly recognising there's a range of the things that need to occur from when we exclude people from the site based on elevated fire dangers through to how response management may occur to a particular location through and that's to allow the localised planning to be undertaken through the agencies, but also the operator as well as to how they may do that. So it's about trying to find that balance at this early stage to ensure that we can provide the opportunities for the agencies in conjunction with the operator to develop up plans that are effective and are suitable for that particular time.
Thank you. I did just reference BF05, but that question also would relate to BF01, so both the emergency management plan mitigation measures. Perhaps a more general question is, do those mitigation measures need to be specific about the areas or the assets that are to be addressed in those management plans? Or is it taken as though they are applying to the project in its entirety?
So I guess that's part of that.
Madam Chair, I would suggest they're specific mitigation measures, but they apply to the project generally. The main difference will be that there'll be mitigation measures incorporated from an emergency management framework during construction, and then they will then be retailored during operation of the wind farm. The main thing to point out is that the risk profile will be different during construction and operation. Therefore, the mitigation measures will need to be tailored to that effect.
Thank you. Yep. That's clear. Thank you. I've just got a couple more questions. They relate to the best practice design and management solutions that you have talked about to some extent. So I'm interested to understand the need for the management documents to have any inbuilt flexibility to be reviewed as knowledge and technology improves. So firstly, do you think that's important in the way that the management documents are packaged?
Yeah, we think that's absolutely important to do that. And as I indicated before, even just as using as an indicator of the change within this industry is the CFA guidelines and the regular updates that are occurring as a result of that. Certainly, our assessment of the wind farm industry is that there is an ongoing requirement, and we clearly indicated that through our evidence yesterday that I think we could say 5 years ago it was it was normal not to have a suppression system within an RCL. There was a point in the last 3 to 5 years where the indications were from our engagement with the manufacturer was that every turbine now turns up in Australia with a suppression system in it. So we are seeing that. I think there will be through, in particular, this process as we further develop the understanding of the fire safety solution within a range of areas, but including an RCL, is that there will be discussions about what other systems can be installed to further ensure that early detection of faults and also products of fire are occurring, and we would see that's going to continue to increase over time. And certainly, as you indicated, that's why there's some generalisation, I suppose, of some of those requirements is to ensure that we're not specific enough that we lock ourselves down, that we can't engage with CFA in particular to have conversations about other systems that may be implemented within that equipment to better manage fire risk.
Okay, thank you. So just over the life of the project, what do you think is an appropriate review time frame for the documents? Are they treated in some ways as living documents and reviewed continually or annually, or are there some set points where you would need to do a more wholesale review?
So certainly our experience at this stage, the risk management plan is if nothing changes, is completed once. Unless there's any further changes proposed to the development that may influence bushfire risk or fire risk, then certainly that occurs. The fire management plan and the emergency management plan, the way we describe that is they become procedure policy documents for the operator. And at this stage, if I speak of past projects, the fire management plan, again, providing there's no significant changes, but the fire management plan is generally a 3-year review process.
Sorry, I just missed that. Sorry, could you say that? How many years? Sorry,
3 years. Fire management plan. And as I indicated yesterday, the fire management plan is largely the maintenance document. It's the maintenance schedule around fire. The emergency management plan in this type of risk environment, we would be expecting to see that annually, that an annual review be undertaken of the emergency management plan. In particular, often people's names changes and phone numbers change, all those sorts of elements need to be updated. So certainly that's a mandatory. In terms of our engagement with CFA, it's usually about 12 months.
Okay. Thank you very much. So no further questions from the IAC. I'll hand you back to Mr. Jessel, who may have some re-examination. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. There are just a few matters to address. You were asked some questions by the chair concerning the proper requirements or proper drafting of the mitigation measures, particularly as they concerned the need to ensure, I'm paraphrasing, but the need to ensure that contemporary fire detection and suppression systems are incorporated. Do you have access to mitigation measure BF07? That's the operational design and infrastructure measure.
Apologies, I don't. I was attempting to locate that, but I just don't at this stage. No.
We'll have that put on the screen, but I'll just read a part of it. The head of the clause requires that the following design measures will be implemented during operation of the project and are best placed in the operational management plan. The first of those is fire detection systems, inbuilt fire protection and suppression systems, and remote alarming and notification systems will be installed in turbines to report potential bushfire risks. These systems will be connected to the supervisory control and data acquisition, the SCADA system that provides remove control over the wind farm, and we'll have to work on the language there. But in substance, does that adequately capture the types of measures that you've described as being best practice measures to reduce the risks of ignition, and if ignition occurs, to address speedy detection?
Yeah, so I think it does two things, Mr. Chesler. It does exactly that. It provides that flexibility to provide that, but it also provides the flexibility that if in 12 months, 2 years' time, we go back to revisit that risk assessment, it's broad enough to ensure that we can pick up modern changes or modern improvements in cell design to ensure that we can actually improve the situation. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. There were then some questions about the need or the importance of ensuring consistency between the plans prepared in respect of this project and the relevant plans prepared in respect of the broader forestry areas. I've got two questions in this regard, or perhaps only one. We can do it this way. In drafting mitigation measures of this type, it's often the case that there's a requirement that certain plans be prepared in consultation with other entities. Would you support relevant modifications to the mitigation measures that would require, as relevant, that the relevant plans be prepared in consultation with other participants within the Green Forest Triangle Alliance?
Yes, we would, Mr. Chesnell, and that would fit nicely within the way that fire management planning is undertaken in Victoria. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. They're the questions by for examination.
Thank you very much.
Could those witnesses please be excused?
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much. We appreciate your evidence and your time. Thank you.
Okay. We'll do that.
We're just going to pause, if you just don't mind pausing for a few minutes.
Of course.
Thank you. I might just ask, we might even break now for 15 minutes.
Yes, okay. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll rise and come back at 15:15. Thank you.
See then. Is that John? Yeah. See you. No. You guys. Yeah, this morning.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Anyway, we have to call her.
Oh, yeah, standing on the edges.
Done.
Oh. Thank you. Welcome back, everyone. Mr. Chessel, I'll hand to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Yesterday, I'd indicated that I was going to return to the written submission after the evidence. Having heard the evidence and the comprehensive nature of it, there's really just one part of the submission that I wanted to address before moving on to the next topic. And if you have document 335 open, that's the opening submission for bushfire risk assessment. And at page 11, at paragraph 35, we make reference to the Delburn wind farm and the assessment undertaken in respect of that project. And I wanted to bring that to the committee's attention because that is a assessment and a panel report that at least in respect of this component of the project, has much application. There are really three aspects of that panel report that we wish to identify for present purposes. That is to assist in providing some context to the evidence that you heard yesterday and through this morning. The first concerns the risk of ignition, that is the extent to which this proposal would give rise to additional risk that is beyond that which presently exists in the environment, at least through the operation phase of the project. And you'll see that at paragraph 36 of the written submission, we've set out relevant observations of the Delburn panel. And what that panel recognised is that one of the biggest issues for submitters was the risk of ignition from the turbine nacelles. And I think that's a fair characterisation of the submissions made in respect of this proposal. There is a history of fires in nacelles, and the manufacturers have been aware it's a problem they need to fix. And again, pausing there, you've heard evidence yesterday about a sequence of fires within nacelles, that is within turbines installed within Victoria presently. The key point that we wish to emphasise is that in each case, those turbines did not include the contemporary suppression and technology that was described by Mr. Potter and Mr. Taylor. What the panel went on to observe in that case is that the best evidence available to the panel and CFA's submission made it clear the risk of ignition in the turbine nacelles is very low. Turbine manufacturers have designed fire detection, protection and suppression systems, remote alarms and notification systems to report potential bushfire risk. There are also systems to automatically shut down if there are multiple warnings. And you heard an explanation as to how those technologies have indeed evolved even since the writing of this report, and how contemporary turbines, and certainly those turbines that would be introduced as part of this project, would be required to implement best practice technologies in that regard. What the panel then went on to recognise is that all of this is part of the project's permit conditions, in this case mitigation measure, and will be incorporated within the relevant management plan to be developed to the satisfaction of the CFA. The permit conditions also require an area of 50 metres around each turbine to be clear of vegetation during the fire season, so a turbine should not start a fire in the surrounding landscape. And again, the same measure is proposed here. It's a measure that you've heard detailed evidence from or in respect of. It's a measure which in our submission is an appropriate response. That is, when one has regard not just to that measure, but the various other measures proposed here that go above and beyond the relevant requirements of the guidelines. It's a measure that the CFA had previously indicated satisfaction in respect of. We wait to hear the CFA's submission, and we understand that Mr. Potter and Mr. Taylor are in ongoing and continuing dialogue with the CFA and will respond in due course. But the measures proposed here are measures that are well understood in our submission within the industry and have been endorsed as being appropriate ones in respect of projects of this type. The next issue that the panel dealt with that we've highlighted for present purposes is the impact of a proposal of this type on aerial firefighting, and we addressed that at paragraph 38. And like in this case, a number of submissions in the Delburn matter raised issues concerning the possibility of the turbines diminishing aerial firefighting capability. And what the panel recorded in that case was that the CFA was very clear. It doesn't object to the permit application on basis of impacts on aerial firefighting. In that case, as it happened, CFA did oppose other aspects of the proposal that weren't ultimately found to be persuasive by the panel. But the CFA in that case was clear in respect of that it did not oppose the project on the basis of its impact on aerial firefighting capacity. And what the panel goes on to record is that the CFA guidelines require turbines to be located at least 300 metres apart to support aerial firefighting. that's still a requirement within the guidelines, and it's a requirement that has been adhered to in the design of this proposal. Then there's a recognition of various limitations on aerial firefighting capacity, weather, terrain, and the presence of smoke. That's, of course, consistent with the evidence given by Mr. Taylor. The panel endorsed, in that case, the evidence given by Mr. Taylor, identifying his particular expertise in respect of tasking and supervising firebombing aircraft. And you've heard how Mr. Taylor is particularly well suited to opine on the extent to which proposals of this type would impact upon the deployment of aerial firefighting and the relevant measures that should be implemented in order to ensure that the turbines don't compromise that capacity in the future, and we rely upon that evidence. Now, at paragraph 40, we've identified that the panel also considered the relevant suite of bushfire mitigation measures that should be implemented in respect of a project of this type. And there, the panel accepted the evidence of Mr. Potter and Mr. Taylor that the project would not increase bushfire risk in the landscape, and that's, in our submission, the finding that this committee should also reach. Subject to, of course, the measures proposed in the permit conditions being adopted. And here we note that the relevant mitigation measures substantively address all the matters identified by Mr. Taylor and by Mr. Potter, and we'll work with Mr. Potter to ensure that it's reformatted, if you like, or reordered in the way that he described as part of the day 2 version. The panel went on to say that it accepted their evidence that the bushfire risks associated with the wind farm can be mitigated to an acceptable level if their recommended strategies and bushfire mitigation and management plans are implemented. Those measures prioritise the protection of human life and will implement the CFA guidelines. What we have done at paragraph 41 is note the particular measures that were identified within the Delburn application as being necessary in order to secure the relevant outcome. And we set them out in paragraphs or subparagraphs A through N. What we know in paragraph 42 is that here, mitigation measures BF01 through BF09 address or require consideration of each and every one of those matters. So the reason that I'm bringing these matters to your attention is twofold. Firstly, to indicate that these are matters that have previously been considered in respect of projects of this type in a comparable setting, that is a setting with perhaps even a enhanced bushfire risk given the relative proximity of dwellings to the relevant project. But secondly, to support the proposition that the suite of measures proposed here should be considered best practice in the context of a project of this type and properly responsive to the relevant requirements and guidelines issued by the authorities. And if you accept those propositions, then in our submission, the committee should readily conclude that the proposal responds appropriately to the relevant provisions of the planning scheme that bear upon an assessment of this type. And because we're dealing here with a planning scheme amendment, ultimately the key considerations are the response of the project to the provisions of the planning policy framework, and in particular clause 1302-1S, but also to the overarching direction contained within the planning scheme that in undertaking the net community benefit assessment in the context of a proposal that would give rise to bushfire risk, there should be a prioritisation of the protection of human life. And in our submission, that the measures proposed here demonstrate an appropriate response to that prioritisation within the overall balancing exercise. They're the matters that we wish to address by way of submissions. I should indicate that we'll file the Delburn panel report so that it's before you. We may return to some aspects of it in closing our case. Unless you have any questions of us, what I propose to do now is move to the final topic for the week, which is land use and planning. I'm just going to indicate that we have filed a written opening submission in respect of that topic. I'm happy to take that document as read so that we can move efficiently to the evidence of Mr. Glossop. I'll just note that what we have done in that submission is address in high-level terms the relevant provisions of the scheme, the nature of the amendment as proposed, the adoption or the utilisation of the special controls overlay to facilitate the introduction of the relevant incorporated document. And we've touched at a high level on the nature of the net community benefit test that, of course, the committee is familiar with, and made some observations about how it should be applied in the context of an application like this. And again, that's a topic we're likely to return to in closing, and I won't labour the point now. So if you're content, Member Kendall, we'll move to the evidence of Mr. Glossop.
One question of clarification on the permit conditions that you indicate have all been included. The one relating to the marking of the monitoring towers taller than 30 metres, just to be clear on where that's captured.
Yes. That was an issue that arose in we think it's AI03. We're just going to track that down. Yes. It requires that the relevant masts, this is mitigation measure AI03, that all Met masts will be marked in accordance with the National Airports Safeguarding Framework.
Yes, thank you.
And we'll have Mr. Jennings address that matter in evidence.
Clear.
I understand there's a clarification to be made, but we'll address that in evidence. So
thank you. That's fine.
There was a question, I think, raised of Mr. Taylor as to whether lighting was proposed in respect of turbines or masts. The answer is no, but marking is proposed in respect of the Met masts in accordance with AI03, and we'll hear the evidence in that regard.
Thank you. Thanks very much.
Okay. Mr. Wright will call evidence from Mr. Glossop, who is ready to go.
While Mr. Glossop prepares himself, members, the relevant documents, document 88 is Mr. Glossop's witness statement. Document 345 is Mr. Glossop's presentation. And those are really the two primary documents. There are other documents we've listed in the written submission that have relevance to this topic, but those are the two documents for Mr. Glossop's evidence today.
Thank you, and welcome to Mr. Glossop.
Morning. Morning. All right, Mr. Glossop, can you please provide your full name to the committee, please?
That's John Andrew Glossop.
And what's your position and place of work?
I'm a director at Glossop Town Planning, and I practice at level 5, 111 Cecil Street in South Melbourne.
And are you the author or primary author of a statement of evidence, which is document 88 in the proceeding, which is dated the 14th of May 2025?
Yes.
And similarly, are you the author or the primary author of the presentation PowerPoint slide pack, which is document 345
yes.
in the proceeding? Are there any corrections you'd like to make to either of those documents?
Yes, there's one typographical error in the evidence statement. And good morning, Member Kendall. Oh, pardon me. Yes, good morning. Good morning, Member Kirsch. Good morning, Member Joyner.
And just for your knowledge, Member Wilkinson is with us online, Mr. Glossop.
Oh, my apologies.
No, that's okay. He doesn't have his camera on at the moment, but he's with us. Thank you. Yep, there we go.
Good morning, Member Wilkinson. See you now. It's if you have a copy of the evidence statement in front of you, it's page 20. And it's you'll see that there's 2 orange dot points above paragraph 38. And the first of those orange dot points begins with the words the proponent has committed to. Can you see that part there? the last sentence, it says the proponent is also committed to a neighbour benefits program for properties within 3.5 M. That should say KLM. So if you could make that adjustment, please. Apart from that, there are no other changes.
Thank you, Mr. Glossop. Do we also find in your primary evidence statement at what is Appendix F from page 80 a curriculum vitae for you?
Yes.
And does that include a description of some 20 plus years of professional expertise and experience in strategic and statutory planning?
It does.
Thank you. Subject, or I should say rather, to the extent that those documents express or contain any facts, are those facts true and correct to the best of your knowledge and belief?
Yes.
And to the extent that they contain opinions, are those opinions reasonably held by you?
Yes.
And do you adopt those documents with that one correction for purposes of your evidence in chief in this proceeding?
I do.
Thank you. I'm going to pass to you, Mr. Glossop. If you could share your screen with your presentation.
Thank you.
I think your camera is already on, and I'll hand over to you to take the committee through your presentation. I may interrupt with questions as you go along.
Thanks, Mr. Wright. Okay, right. Well, again, good morning. And my name's John Glossop. I'm a Director of Glossop Town Planning, and I've been engaged by the project team to provide expert planning evidence in this matter. I dare say you're pretty familiar by now with what the project is, so I won't labour the point, but obviously it comprises of a number of elements to it. The primary one obviously is the wind energy facility, but there is a use trigger for utility installation, which comprises the transmission lines. There are also roadworks, which primarily require some road widening to facilitate the haulage of compounds from the Port of Portland, and then there is some associated native vegetation removal. The application, the proposal that's before the committee is to be implemented essentially through the application of a specific controls overlay, or the SCO, to the project land, and that will have the consequence of inserting an incorporated document, which would then facilitate the necessary planning approvals for the project. I'll go on later to talk about why I think the SCO is an appropriate control for this project. Now, my instructions are appended to my evidence, and essentially I was asked to look at the matters that were relevant to my expertise. It's interesting in these matters because, you know, in some respects I'm here as a land use planning witness, but often the use issues are not that contentious. It's rather the impact of the development that implements that use or commences that use. And I feel like that's much the case here today. In my view, the use is a compatible land use, having regard to the nature of the activities per se. And of course, I don't think it's controversial to say that renewable energy facilities, whether they're wind farms or solar farms, are an appropriate land use in non-urban parts of Victoria. They already comprise a significant part of the rural landscape. And as I say in my evidence, as the world moves towards a decarbonised economy, the presence of these facilities in both urban and rural landscapes, they'll become more prominent, and those landscapes will inevitably change over time. Now, by way of the planning scheme controls itself, as you know, the project area primarily affects land in the farming zone, and in relation to that, I think we've got about 85% of the project area in commercial forestry and around about 14.2% in freehold farmland. The freehold farmland is mainly grazing land. There is some part of the project area that goes through public conservation and recreation zones. It's primarily associated with the transmission line, and there is some part of the project land in the public use zone. I think that's at the end of the project where the transmission line connects to the terminal station. Again, from a zoning perspective, the proposal that's before the committee, I believe to be consistent with the land use provisions of those controls. Of course, the proposal is permitted by those controls as well. From what I can gather, much of the time that's been spent to date in considering this proposal has concentrated on the impact of the built form, and particularly as a consequence of the presence of a series of overlays, notably the environmental significance overlay, and we've got 3 schedules, ESO 1, 2 and 3. Now, ESO 1 affects the southern portion of the site. ESO 2 affects a small part of the transmission line area, and ESO 3 affects the whole of the site. In respect of the significant landscape overlay, SLO1 affects a small part of the western part of the site, and as you can see from that map there, and my mouse is moving fairly slowly over there, it's predominantly in that western part of the site there. The other control, and relevant to the previous evidence that you just heard before me, is the presence of the bushfire management overlay, which affects most of the site. Now, in terms of the site itself, the Land Use Planning Impact Assessment report has a very good description of the project area. So the project area itself comprises around about 8,350 hectares, broken up of 121 parcels and around about 22 different landowners. The wind farm site itself comprises an area of 8,318 hectares, of which around about 85% is commercial forestry and 14%, 14.2 to be exact, is freehold farmland. The transmission line corridor comprises 21 hectares, which is, I think, 0.3% of the entire wind farm area. The transmission line is around about 26.6 kilometres, of which 7.1 kilometres of that passes through the how are we pronouncing that? Cobbabony National Park and the Cobbabony Forest Park. I knew I wouldn't be able to get that out today. Apologies. So effectively, it's around about 85% of the land in commercial forestry, around about 14% in freehold land, and about 0.3% in public land. It's a large area. It was certainly a challenging area to see from a site inspection. And in fact, the scale of this project, moving ahead in my evidence a bit, I think is one of the justifications, in my mind at least, around the appropriateness of the decision to apply the specific controls overlay to the land. So the wind farm site is located on timber forestry, plantation and grazing land. The transmission line travels along the Boiler Swamp Road through the National Park and the Forest Park, and it also crosses farming land when it just prior to it connecting to the terminal further to the east, south of Haywood. There are several pinch points in Portland and the entry into the laydown area, and I understand you'll hear evidence from the traffic witness later in the proceeding. Now, the key context, of course, is that there is a small part of the project area in farming land, but the majority of it is, of course, forestry land. Now, I would categorise both of those landscapes as being modified landscapes to a greater or lesser extent. There are obviously a number of public parks and trails and camping sites that are dotted along the coast, and they are obviously out of the project area but have views towards it. There's a series of coastal parks, the Ramsar wetlands to the west of the site, the township of Nelson, which of course is out of the project area. I think it's within about 3.5 kilometres of the project area, and parts of that at that very eastern edge would have views of some of the turbines. And there are, of course, scattered dwellings outside of the townships, predominantly in the farming zone land. There are areas of Aboriginal cultural heritage sensitivity. Obviously, the area is bushfire prone, and there are two historic sites, one of which is on the Victorian Heritage Inventory, but there are no heritage overlays affecting the land. As with all of these matters, it's likely that from a planning scheme assessment perspective, these sorts of proposals will have different impacts. And some of those impacts, in my view, and I dare say in the view of others, are positive, some are neutral, some are negative. The planning scheme these days asks us to resolve those matters, having regard to concepts of net community benefit. Also, because this is a planning scheme amendment compared to a planning permit application, Clause 71022 sets out a different decision-making framework as a consequence. And essentially that split is explained in 71022, which says that a planning authority must take into account the planning policy framework when it prepares an amendment to the planning scheme, take into account, whereas a responsible authority must take into account and give effect to the planning policy framework when it makes a decision under this planning scheme. This does not apply to policy guidelines and policy documents. So what that distinction reflects really is that for the most part, planning scheme amendments sit at the plan making side of planning, whereas in terms of when a body is acting as a responsible authority, really they're in the plan assessment side. So I think as a consequence, we're clearly in the plan making side of the equation today, and that I think provides a different framework for the assessment of this proposal compared to if it was a permit. Of course, the other direction that you should have regard to is Ministerial Direction number 11, which is the strategic assessment of assessments. And what it does, in essence, I think, is to look at the project holistically and to ask a range of questions, beginning with, does the amendment implement the objectives of planning in Victoria? Now, as you know, the objectives of planning in Victoria have changed recently, and I'm just going to try to move this across, and I've made reference to this in my evidence. And so Section 4 was amended to include Objective DA, which is to provide for the explicit consideration of the policies and obligations of the state relating to climate change, including but not limited to greenhouse gas emission reduction targets and the need to increase resilience to climate change when decisions are made about the use and development of land. Now, in addition to that, planning schemes have also been adjusted to recognise the, effectively the existential threat posed by global climate change. And you'll be aware that Clause 01 of the planning scheme was amended only a few years ago to include the last dot point, which is to support responses to climate change. Now that's that dot point is quite different in its application compared to the other dot points above it, because it's the only specific policy objective that is expressed as a purpose statement in the planning scheme. The others are more operationally structured, I think.
Mr. Glossop, before you go on,
Yes.
I want to draw your attention to one other section of the Planning Environment Act. Could I ask you to stop sharing your screen for a moment, please?
Yeah, of course.
So what I'm sharing is section 12. I'll take you to the head of that section, which is what are the duties and powers of planning authorities. And I'll take you down to section 2, capital A, which, as I understand, was inserted at the same time as new subsection DA in the section 4. And 2A reads, without limiting subsection 2, in preparing a planning scheme or amendment, a planning authority, in accordance with and subject to any directions issued under section 12A, and I don't understand there to be any, must have regard to A, emissions reductions targets, and otherwise B, any significant risk to any use or development envisaged by the scheme or amendment that arises from or is likely to arise from the impacts of climate change. Now, I'm interested in particular in your views about the relevance of a direction like this, and A in particular, about the planning authority having regard to emissions reductions targets, if you had any comments about that for this exercise.
Yeah, I do. Well, I mean, I think that I've been in planning for 30 odd years, and what we've seen over time is that planning schemes are amended from time to time, and the Act is amended in time to time as issues arise that are important enough to demand that recognition. Clearly, over the past 10 years, planning schemes have been updated to really signal the government's commitment to addressing climate change, and they're also an indication of the importance of this particular issue. It's a singularly important issue in planning terms, and I can't see how these days a planning authority could, for example, conduct a project like a landscape impact assessment strategy without having regard to the potential role that land might play as a generator of renewable energy that would contribute to emissions reduction targets. So these changes, I think, are quite profound. I don't think that they're necessarily appreciated as much as they should be by some in our industry, but certainly from my perspective, they indicate a sea change in the way in which planning decision making should be undertaken.
Thank you, Mr. Glossop. I'll invite you to take control again.
So really then that conversation neatly plays into the second dot point there, which is how does the amendment address any environmental, social and economic effects? And of course, tied in with that too, of course, is bushfire risk, because that's often a climate-related matter. In relation to the planning policy framework and any adopted state policy, I've undertaken a detailed analysis of that in my evidence statement, and that starts really at page 15 of my statement. Just get that page up. Where in addition to the Act and the purpose, there are a number of policies in the state section of the planning scheme that really start to recognise the importance of climate change as a land use planning matter. There are policies that really support the development of energy generation, transmission and distribution infrastructure to transition to a low carbon economy, and to develop appropriate infrastructure to meet community demand for energy services. Lastly, relevantly, there's the dot point that talks about facilitate the production and distribution of zero emission gases and fuels. And the last one is to support energy projects in locations that minimise land use conflicts and take advantage of existing resources and infrastructure networks. Now, I would, well, of course, it goes on to facilitate energy projects that help diversify local economies and improve sustainability and social outcomes, and facilitate energy generation and storage to meet on-site energy needs. Of course, relevantly, there is clause 1901-23 renewable energy, which seeks to support the provision and use of renewable energy in a manner that ensures appropriate siting and design considerations are met. Now, clearly, all of those policies have language that is enabling, and that's reflected by the use of terms like support and facilitate. Now, that the support for renewable energy, again, not surprisingly, in this particular municipality, is reflected in the local section of Council's planning scheme, and I draw the committee's attention to clause 0202, 0203-6, and clause 1701-1L, diversified economy, which is to encourage Portland to be developed as a hub for renewable energy research, design and manufacturing. Now, I think too, the particular provision that deals with wind energy facilities is also clearly facilitative in its language, and together that policy context provides considerable support for the proposal. Now, of course, those policies have not been developed in a vacuum. And what I'd like to just draw your attention to now is clause 11 of the planning scheme. Now, clause 11 is this sort of overarching settlement planning policy. It says planning is to anticipate and respond to the needs of existing and future communities through provision of zoned and serviced land for housing, employment, recreation, open space, commercial and community facilities, and the last part is infrastructure. Now, it says planning is to recognise the need for and as far as practicable contribute to, and I'll take you down to I think it's the 6.1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, yep, 6 dot point, climate change adaptation and mitigation. And planning is to facilitate sustainable development that takes full advantage of existing settlement patterns and investment in transport, utility, social, community and commercial infrastructure and services. So to me, what that suggests is that in a location like this that has the advantage of being proximate to existing high voltage transmission lines and the network at the Hayward Terminal Station, its proximity to the Port of Portland, its proximity to the only wind turbine tower manufacturer in Australia, which is Keppel Prince in Portland, and the fact that this project could supplement the power needs of the Portland aluminium smelter, are consistent with the settlement planning direction at clause 11. And of course, more broadly, these policies don't exist in a vacuum. They've been developed having regard to a broader strategic context, and I'm sure you've all been at presentations by Mr. Townsend on Plan for Victoria, and of course, one of the like I love a good headline number, and the headline number coming out of Plan for Victoria is a population for the state of 10.3 million by 2051. It's a massive number, and Melbourne being the largest state, the largest capital city in Australia by that time. So really, these projects are, on the one hand, we've got the climate change policy discussion, which is, some would say, the most important discussion planning should be having at the moment. And then, of course, we've got the infrastructure needs that are created by a growing population. So on the one hand, we need our power generation to be decentralised, decarbonised, and the nature of these renewable energy facilities is that they're disaggregated. But we need, and that we need that type of power because of the changing climate, but we can't do without that power because of the growing population. And of course, everything, like including the SRL, is most likely electrified, running off an electrified power source. So this kind of conversation around where do these facilities go and how are they designed can't be had without reference to that broader planning context in my mind.
You may come to this, Mr. Glossop, but with those two factors you've just discussed, this the climate policy discussion, the need to transition to renewables, but also the power demands and infrastructure demands from growing population. While it's fresh in memory, what do you say about this project by reference to those two factors?
Yeah. Well, this project clearly yields significant benefits in that regard, and I think I quote from chapters 01 project description and 02 project rationale of the EES, which says that this project could contribute approximately 5% of Victoria's electricity generation. It's anticipated to deliver around 2,000 gigawatt hours of renewable electricity per year, which would reduce Australia's carbon emissions by 2.4 million tonnes per annum. And the proposed carbon benefits are the equivalent of removing 616,000 cars from the road or planting 15.9 million trees. So those benefits seen within that planning context, but also within the national context of emissions reduction targets, to me, really elevates the significance and importance of delivering this project in a timely way. Did that answer your questions?
Thank you.
Now, of course, as I said before, it's often the case that projects like this have benefits, disbenefits, or neutral impacts, and that's planning. Right, that happens for almost every application that we see. I think I'm yet to see a project that has entirely positive benefits. Even a dual occupancy will create some additional shadow, lead to some increase in traffic, create additional building bulk that's experienced off-site. So practically everything that we deal with has a variety of good bits and bad bits. What's now happened in the Victoria planning provisions is that those tensions are now to be resolved. We are told those tensions are to be resolved through the application of clause 7102-3 of the planning scheme, which talks about this net community benefit. And in some respects, it's often referred to as a net community benefit test, but I'm not sure that language is helpful, but it's not a bad way to describe it. Is really, I think, at the heart of what we do as planners, which is to look at the present impacts, but look at them in a context that is future leaning, and to understand that in some cases, a good project, a supportable project, a project that has positive benefits will also carry with it some negative consequences as well. Now, the factors, of course, that support this project are, as I've said, the national, state and local policies that seek carbon emissions reductions and facilitate renewable energy. Of course, there is also the geographical and climatic benefits of this project, being in an area of strong and consistent wind, but not too strong, and its proximity to those other land uses which have the capacity to leverage the benefit of this project. The nature of the land use in which the project will be sited, which is essentially mostly 85% at least within an area of ongoing forestry operation. And of course, the benefit of that is limited native vegetation removal. I've already mentioned the fact that this site will provide good connectivity, has the potential to provide good connectivity to the electricity grid, and its proximity to the Port of Portland and Keppel Prince and the Portland aluminium smelter are clearly locationally specific attributes that this project can leverage. Of course, too, with these types of projects, they're large-scale infrastructure projects, and you've only got to drive around Victoria these days and try to get accommodation at a Best Western or something like that, and you'll struggle because they're all occupied by tradespeople working on large infrastructure projects. So these projects do deliver significant employment and economic benefits to the local area in which they're situated. On the other hand, there are matters that are neutral or negative, and they also need to be considered. But in town planning terms, then really the approach is to determine whether in aggregate terms the proposal results in a net community benefit. And I think that means that there might be some, say, a view that might have have a significant visual impact from one location. And I think in that conversation then, okay, you'll put that into the mix, but really the issue is, in aggregate terms, does the proposal result in a net community benefit? Now, sadly, well, I won't say sadly. Let me rephrase that. Neither the Act nor the planning scheme set out a methodology for undertaking a net community benefit analysis, and as I say at my footnote 39, the panel in C154 Hume put it that there is no magic formula to assess and determine net community benefit. There are thought leaders in planning that consider that it's a positive thing for the scheme that it doesn't provide, that net community benefit analysis is not a codified assessment. And that is because as soon as you codify it, you are effectively directing decision makers to form a view about a project one way or the other. In that respect, the net community benefit analysis, it's not a social impact analysis or an economic impact assessment, nor is it a cost benefit analysis. Now, those types of assessments typically do have well, they might have multiple, but they at least have defined methodological approaches to the preparation of that kind of assessment. It's not really the way we do it in planning. So, in simple terms, a net community benefit analysis weighs up the positive, neutral, and negative attributes of a project, and obviously an NCB would deliver more positive and neutral attributes in aggregate terms than negative ones. In theory, at least, these differences need not be overwhelming. That is to say, the scale doesn't need to be overwhelmingly positive for a project to be approved. It could be a slender benefit, and that could be acceptable, as I say, at least in theory. Now, I've completed a net community benefit assessment in my statement of evidence. And in this respect, I've provided evidence to a number of EESs in the past, and in those previous ones, what I've done, I've adopted a different approach then to now. So in previous times, I've looked at really just what are the land use issues and presented an analysis to say, is there a net community benefit from the perspective of land use planning? And I don't think that's gone over too well by committees. So I've learned from that. And this time, what I asked for was the opportunity to review the evidence of the proponent. So I was able to read that prior to me completing my evidence statement. I've reviewed that in detail, and then I formed a view about what I thought that evidence said from an NCB perspective. Were the outcomes positive, neutral, or negative? I think realistically, there's limitations to the way in which I can look at some of the technical evidence because it's just outside my area of expertise to comment on. So, for example, I read the aeronautical evidence, and I thought, well, that's not really something that I can comment on in a way that I thought would be of benefit to the committee. So I didn't look at that. But for the other evidence statements, and also with the notable exception of the I think it was the Aboriginal cultural evidence. I think it was that one.
In your statement of evidence at page 38 and 39 is where you deal with Aboriginal cultural heritage.
Thank you. Yeah. In relation to the Aboriginal cultural heritage of Mr. Feldman, I did read it, and I looked at what he had to say, and I feel like I understood it, but I thought I'm not quite sure whether those benefits were positive, negative, or neutral from an NCB perspective. And I also thought, well, maybe some people might even say that it's inappropriate for me to form such a view because those kind of matters are, maybe they're a bit culturally relative as well, and maybe I'm not the best person to look at that. I also thought too that in relation to that, there was a CHMP that was going to be prepared, and that output would presumably be an important component of making that NCB finding. So I refrained from forming a view on that, but in relation to the other ones, I think I did my best to form a view about whether I thought the impacts would be positive, neutral, or negative. And clearly, then the ones that I thought were clearly positive were the project's alignment with policy objectives, job creation, greenhouse gas emissions reductions, the negative impacts of the project's impacts on landscape, flora and fauna. And I formed that view because I didn't think it would be reasonable to, with landscape, the project will clearly be seen. The impact of that will have varying degrees of visibility and varying degrees of impact. But I thought overall that would be a net negative. And because there was some impact on flora and fauna, I concluded that that would be an overall net negative, notwithstanding the fact that the evidence all suggested that those impacts sat within acceptable limits, right? Reasonable standards of environmental impact. So that really then led me to form the view that the overall environmental and economic impacts of the proposal were such that it's clear to me that the net benefit fell on the side of the project proceeding. And that considering the Commonwealth and state government's policy and legislative objectives to reduce carbon emissions and the associated strength of the policy which exists in the scheme, then the project's potential negative impacts do not warrant preventing the project from proceeding. And I also note that that's the view of the subject matter experts on ecology and landscape as well. So to me, it was relevant that the evidence of all the witnesses is that the impacts where they exist are either acceptable, subject to certain conditions, or are positive. And I think that should flow into reasonably an analysis of net community benefit when we're doing that weighing and balancing exercise. Now that's probably kind of the juicier parts of the evidence. I'll talk about the ordinance now. The SEO is a relatively new control that's been inserted into the VPP to achieve specific land use and development objectives. We had a similar control in there before, which allowed projects that were inconsistent with aspects of the planning scheme to proceed subject to an incorporated document. But the SEO is a better control because it's mapped and the name of the incorporated document is listed in the planning scheme. So that makes it more transparent. The department has been using the SEO quite a bit to implement projects of a particular scale or of a particular type. And at paragraph 148 of my evidence, which I might just put on the screen, that's page 51. So it's PDF 52. I just refer to the practitioner's guide to Victoria's planning system, which describes, I should say, the role of the SCO in the following terms. So it's to be used to achieve a particular land use and development outcome in extraordinary circumstances that are deemed to be a major issue of policy. Well, I think this certainly fits the bill in relation to both of those characteristics. That is to say, it's a very large project, and as I've expressed to you before, I consider climate change policy to be the most significant part of the policy matrix in the Victorian system. So certainly, to me, it would be an appropriate tool to use in this circumstance. Now, the purpose of the SCO could allow the project to occur with or without the need to separately obtain a planning permit. It essentially, in this case, seeks to exclude the usual controls set out in the planning scheme on the basis that these matters have already been resolved by way of the EES process. So I believe the use of the SCO is appropriate because it does constitute exceptional circumstances. The size of the land, combined with the range of sensitivities and the extent of statutory approvals required, are unique. I think it would be inefficient to require the proponent to undergo an EES process followed by a planning permit application process. I've set out a range of other projects, probably of a lesser scale, that have used the SCO, and since completing this evidence statement, I've found some others. So I think reasonable to apply it to this matter.
In relation to those others, are you aware of any other wind energy facilities that have used an SCO?
Yeah, I think the Golden Plains Wind Farm has used the SCO, and that project was approved via an incorporated document. The structure of that incorporated document somewhat different to here. It's perhaps more in the structure of a permit that simply requires a bunch of plans to be approved with conditions. The approach here is those kind of conditions are set out in the EMF. I think this is this approach to ordnance drafting and approval and capturing the approval process through the EMF, I think is a technique that's really worth exploring here. What I'm drawn to is the fact that it's a kind of a singular document and that it can be updated from time to time. Whereas, in the past, having a series of plans and one gets updated and you've got to update the whole other plans out can be quite challenging, I think, for a project of such significant complexity as this. So, yeah, I'm drawn to the current structure of the incorporated document as a way to implement the outcomes of the EES. So I've looked at the incorporated document. I think it's generally sound. I made a couple of what I consider to be minor suggestions for improvements, and pardon me, and they were to make those two slight amendments. I also recommended some very minor typographic and other corrections to the explanatory report. And look, the explan report looks like it's sort of the old format. So there's just been some new changes to the template that would require would need to be addressed if the amendment was to be approved. Now, that's very straightforward and very easy to do, and wouldn't take my office very much time at all if we had to do it.
Before you move off those changes to the incorporated document, I just wanted to ask you conceptually about the two changes you've got on screen there. The first was to condition 7.1, and what we have done in the day one version is include reference to those two figures.
Yeah.
But conceptually, am I right, and tell me if I'm wrong, that what you are after is effectively a link back in the development plan condition to really the project infrastructure layout plans from the EES to have that link back to what's been considered as part of this process? Is
That's
that
right.
correct?
Yeah, that's right. In the exhibited version, it wasn't kind of clear to me what was being approved. And so I thought we needed to somewhere in the incorporated document effectively have a base plan that was then the starting point. There might be amendments to that, of course, but I thought that would be the clearest way to know what was actually being approved, and of course that gives certainty to the proponent as well.
And you're comfortable with the use of the ordinary form of wording generally in accordance with those plans?
Oh, definitely, yes. The alternative would be if it was in accordance with, and then that creates all sorts of problems down the track. So I think generally in accordance provides sufficient scope to change those plans.
And similarly, in relation to condition 7.8, have I understood correctly that you were also wanting to be comfortable that there was a link back to the EMF that will ultimately be approved by the minister pursuant to the INCDOC planning condition back to the EMF that's under consideration as part of the EES process that the committee will then comment on, that will then be approved by the minister and then make its way into a version which is ultimately signed off under the incorporated document. Is that what you are concerned about? And on understanding that process, are you comfortable with what's now proposed in the incorporated document?
Yes to both questions.
Thank you.
Mr. Wright, just before you move on, if I could just make one observation. It's convenient to do it now while you're talking about it. That's in relation to condition 7.1, and I understand Mr. Glossop's position and the response from the proponent. It's not uncommon to have a further qualification about those plans that refers to the outcome of the minister's assessment. That's often found in incorporated documents that have been through the EES process. Just something for you to think about when you're developing the final version of the EMF.
Yes, and Member Kirsch, I've asked that question of Mr. Glossop for a particular reason which will become apparent to you when you receive some further information from us about the turbine and infrastructure layouts, because it might be necessary to reference other documents. And so we just wanted to be clear that the purpose of this change is to capture the link back to whatever the relevant layout and infrastructure types and locations are with that general accordance limitation. So it'll become apparent to you that there will be further changes to the drafting in that part of the conditions. Thank you, Mr. Glossop.
Thank you.
Button, back to you.
So having looked at the day one documentation, that resolved my recommendation regarding 7.1. And in relation to 7.8, then those mitigation measures that are identified under condition 7.8B will include the final agreed mitigation measures for the project. So that resolves my second recommendation. So in conclusion, it is my evidence that the project will result in a net community benefit and warrants town planning approval. The day one version of the incorporated document is appropriate, and that minor changes should be made to the explanatory report before the amendment is gazetted.
Thank you, Mr. Glossop. There's nothing further from us in chief. Thank you, members.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Glossop. We'll move into some questions of cross-examination, and Mr. Tobin is with us, and I'll let you introduce yourself and who you're representing, Mr. Tobin.
Thank you, Member Kendall. Good afternoon, Mr. Glossop. I'm representing DECA and Parks Victoria in respect of this matter, but the questions I have today are on behalf of Parks Victoria only.
Good afternoon, Mr. Tobin.
Firstly, I read your assessment as you've just detailed in your evidence in chief as essentially an exercise in setting out what you consider to be the relevant matters and undertaking a net community benefit assessment. of the project that's advanced by the proponent.
Yes.
Within the EES material, one of the technical appendices, Technical Appendix A, is an appendix which considers transmission line options for the transmission line, which has ultimately ended up submerged or buried under Boiler Swamp Road in the project advanced by the proponent. Okay. Have you, in the course of preparing for this matter and given your stated scope that you outlined in relation to the answer to my last question, have you had cause to review that report in detail, or is that something that is not really part of your evidence?
I would have reviewed it in the course of preparing my evidence, yes.
Have you undertaken any sort of detailed analysis of the various factors that the options assessment used to work out whether there should be a buried transmission line through the Kabobani National Park, or whether there should be some other solution external? Or has it been a general awareness process for you?
Yes, I focused on the underground option through Boiler Swamp Road.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Now, in terms of your evidence more generally, we're now at about day 10 or so of the hearing. Have you been involved in or listening into the hearing in the course of what's transpired before your appearance here today?
No.
Have you? So you haven't been around for the, I don't know, ecological, arboricultural, the visual amenity evidence, those matters?
No.
I think your expert reports document 88, and I think we're up to 345 by the time we get to your presentation today. Has it been your instruction or your practice in respect of this matter to keep abreast of all of those documents that have come during the intervening period?
Not all of them, Mr. Tobin, but I've looked at ones that I've been asked to consider and ones that I thought were relevant.
Okay. And have they been on particular topics? For instance, have you been focusing in on ones relating to ecology?
I think I've read the technical notes that have been provided to the panel. I've looked at proponent submissions on particular subject matters, and I've looked at the evidence presentations of a number of the witnesses, and I might not recall them all, but I certainly recall reading Mr. Weston's, Mr. Hark's, off the top of my head.
Yeah. You see, your expert evidence and the net community benefit assessment within it is from the 14th of May. And I think you would, I think we can agree that you usefully set out a structure of what should be considered in this type of assessment for the committee. That's right. That's the central tenet of your evidence.
Yes.
But I think you'll agree also that having identified that and provide your opinion as of the 14th of May, with the limited exceptions of the further information that you've read into beyond that, that baton now gets passed to the committee, who's had the benefit of the oral evidence and all of that material, correct?
Well, that's the nature of the hearing process, isn't it?
Yeah, and I'm just really trying to, and I guess the point is that your exercise is point in time.
Well, to an extent, that's true of everybody. But for example, I'm not aware of any particular changes that have come out of evidence that have been heard by the committee that would be materially relevant to my evidence from what I can gather. And of course, I mean, I've said this in the past in hearings like this, that ultimately any expert witness only ever hears a small fraction of the hearing. That's the nature of the role. So that's, I think, unavoidable. And I don't think that in any way diminishes either my conclusions or the reasons for those conclusions.
Yeah. I want to pick up on something you said in your evidence in chief about the balancing exercise and taking those undoubted positive attributes of the proposal and some of the neutral or not positive attributes of the proposal and putting them together. The question is really, what's your advice on how the committee progresses if it finds that in that balancing exercise, if it finds that a particular matter or a particular impact is unacceptable on its face, it has and I'll just use, for example, arising from a question yesterday, if there was an unacceptable impact on visual amenity in a particular place, how does the panel, or the committee rather, approach that reconciliation of that? Is it still a balancing exercise, or is it a different approach to what you've outlined?
Well, I think you can't look at one issue or one area without looking at the broader net community benefit of the project. So I think that would be the starting point. Of course, it's always possible to change proposals or whittle them down, and at some point the broader benefit of the entire project will change, probably in a negative way. And so I think that, again, it's a question of looking at all the benefits against all of the costs. The issue of the landscape or visual impact, I think, is a very interesting planning issue, because in some respects the nature of that impact is an incredibly subjective one. I guess you could say so too as town planning evidence, but it's very much subjective, isn't it? Some people might think that the presence of a tower is an unwanted intrusion into the tranquility of an area. Others might look at the visibility of a turbine as being a positive reaction to climate change and evidence that someone is doing something about that very important issue. So I think that it's undoubtedly the case in a project like this, there will be some impacts that are more significant than other impacts. But I think 7102-3 invites us to balance those impacts out. Now, I don't mean that means that it always means that you just accept those impacts, but rather that those impacts would have to be incredibly significant, overwhelmingly significant, in fact, in my view, to lead to a difference in conclusion. And one of the, I think, important points in that respect, particularly around landscape impact, is the view of the subject matter expert who has undertaken an expert visual impact analysis of the entire project.
I think you've answered that. Yeah. So if I understand your answer, I want to try and distill that. I think what you're telling the committee, Mr. Glossop, is that the exercise does not fundamentally change in any way. It's still a balancing exercise to be undertaken. That's point one in what you've just put.
Well, that's right. Well, I'm not telling. I know you don't mean that, but I'm not telling the committee anything. But that would be my opinion.
Yeah. And secondly, that you're not aware of any such fundamental issue that would be significant in the balancing exercise that would turn it the other way?
I'm not aware of any issue of that nature, no.
Yeah. Okay. Last issue of, I think I've gone a minute over time, Mr. Glossop, so last issue that I want to ask you about. Of course, in looking at the land surrounding the proposal, you've looked at the prevailing zones, appropriately looked at the prevailing zones as they exist today. You can only deal with the planning scheme as you find it. That's the right approach, isn't it?
Well, I guess unless there was a seriously entertained planning proposal in the environs that was reached a particular stage of the process that required me to consider it. Yes, it's the correct approach.
That's a fair qualification, Mr. Glossop. I'm just going to share screen with Vic Plan and Lake Mombiong. And so this land's within a PP RZ. It's a coastal park under the National Parks Act. And there's certainly no question that in assessing the surrounds, you've approached it the correct way with the zoning as it is prevailing. But I just wanted to understand your experience. Is a PPRZ what you'd normally expect for this sort of coastal park under the National Parks Act, or is that more usually a PCRZ?
It's more usually a PCRZ, yes.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Glossop. They're all of the questions. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you. So we have some questions from the IAC, and I'll ask Member Kirsch to take you through those. Thank you.
Thanks. So just a couple of questions, Mr. Glossop. The first one, have you read or considered the proponent's submission in relation to landscape and visual impacts? That's document 336.
Yes, I believe that document was circulated yesterday or the day before. Is that the one that you're talking about?
I am, and that's in part dealt with the role of the coastal spaces landscape assessment study. If you have read it, do you have anything to say about it?
Are you referring to the issue of that document being a decision guideline in? Sorry,
yes, specifically that issue, yeah.
Yeah. So firstly, it's the case that the practitioner's guide no longer would suggest it is appropriate to refer to a background document in a decision guideline. The only document that you should include in a decision guideline is an incorporated document in the planning scheme. So that got me thinking, why is it there? I had assumed that maybe they haven't done a review of their planning scheme. In fact, they have. They did review that control only recently, changed the language, but left that document there. So I still feel it shouldn't be in a decision guideline. And ultimately, I form that view because background documents have no place in the exercise of discretion. The role of a decision guideline has changed over the years. You might recall the old practice note on incorporated and reference documents, as they were called there, that 2015 one, which suggested a different role for reference documents, and effectively maybe they could be used to assist the exercise of discretion if they had been undertaken, their development had been undertaken in a particular way. In 2025, that's no longer the case. In fact, it hasn't been the case for years. And so the conundrum there, in one sense, the ordinance requires a consideration of the document. Practitioner's guide says it shouldn't be there in the first place. And more relevantly, the operational part of the planning scheme say you shouldn't give it any weight decision making. I think that conundrum should be resolved in favour of giving the document limited weight. After all, a decision guideline doesn't tell you what to think. It simply tells you what to think about. Different policy, and that the nature of a decision guideline provides the decision maker with the discretion of how to use that document. So it would be a valid, my view, a valid approach, having regard to all of the matters that I just said to you before, to give it little or no weight. That is to say, the weight you might give it is to say, okay, it's there, it provides a background context to the application of the provision, but no more than that.
In saying that, I assume your view is that it is a relevant consideration. It's just a matter of what weight you give to it.
Yes, I think it's a matter of weight. Yes, as you say.
My second question is to revisit the net community benefit issue that you've talked about and Mr. Tobin took you to. In your summary presentation, you talk about the negative impacts associated with landscapes, flora and fauna. Understanding the qualification that you made to Mr. Tobin about which of the more recent materials you've read and which you haven't, is there anything you wanted to add to your written evidence report in relation to the impacts of the project on the utility of the national parks? So it's the national parks, the state parks, the coastal parks. So it's how did you factor in impacts on their utility and enjoyment as part of your net community benefit test?
Yeah. I mean, I think one of the changes that's been brought to my attention was that Boiler Swamp Road could not provide access to emergency vehicles during part of the installation of the transmission line. So that's a new thing, and I wasn't aware of that when I wrote my evidence. That's a relevant consideration that has certainly happened after my evidence was prepared. I understand that the approach to resolve that will be through the use of management plans and controls. I haven't been privy to what those might say, so I haven't been able to form a view on that, but that's probably something additional since my evidence. Now, in relation to the utility and amenity of the parks, I mean, I think that is something that I had regard to when I was preparing my evidence anyway. I visited those parks and stood in the spots where some of those, I think almost all of those montages were taken from. I asked for visitation data, which is I think something Mr. Weston also had regard to as part of his evidence, and did consider, I guess, the consequence of the visibility of the turbines from various parts of those park areas.
There was nothing else you wanted to add?
I wasn't sure whether you wanted me to go on or answer your question, but
it's really just an opportunity for you to expand on what you've already covered in your written evidence report and what you've covered in your submission. So
I'm happy to talk about it. I just wasn't sure whether you wanted me to go on, but yeah, look, I think that undoubtedly it will be the case that this issue of the visibility of the turbines will be something that some people will view negatively, some people won't care about, some people will think it's a good thing. One of the things that I did feel about the project area, and I obviously haven't walked through the entirety of the site, but I've seen a fair bit of it, is that the visibility of the turbines will be there'll be different visual impacts, obviously, across the project site. So from some areas you'll see it quite clearly, others you'll see a bit of it, some other areas you'll see none of it. There's certainly some parts of the campsites where there'll be absolutely no visual impact whatsoever. and the only impacts will be during the construction period where there might be road closures or detours or those types of things. To me, it's kind of inevitable that a project like this will have those kind of impacts. And I think you can look at the impacts somewhat differently in a campsite than you would for a dwelling. After all, that's someone's home and they live in it all the time. They spend a lot of time in the house. And I do think the planning system probably elevates those kind of visual impacts over what I think are, at least for the users of the facility, a temporary impact. And I am kind of persuaded by the evidence of some of the others around how people might perceive that impact. I mean, they're speaking as a, can't always speak as a planner, sometimes you've got to speak as a person, and I know people in my household would see the presence of turbines as a net positive. I've got 3 grandkids. You know, you start to look at things a bit differently when you've got those people in your family. You start to take a longer term view, and I think it's hard to walk back from the consequential impacts of global climate change. The planning system is obviously reacting and responding to those challenges. So, as I said earlier, I feel like if you were doing a landscape impact assessment in 2025, that could not ignore the resource in these areas. It just simply couldn't. Maybe 10, 15 years ago, well, 2006, when that coastal study was done, maybe it wasn't as elevated an issue in either the Act or the scheme as it is now. But I think if you were doing that project now, you would inevitably say different things. And if you weren't, I'd wonder why you weren't.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I've just got a couple of follow-up questions. The statement that you just made, you can't avoid the resource in those areas if you're doing the landscape assessment. Were you talking about wind resource?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. And just one final question. Certainly heard you've talked a lot about climate change and how it's now reflected in the planning scheme. I'm interested just to know succinctly what you think what is the significance of the planning scheme now, including supporting responses to climate change as a purpose in clause 01, in contrast with the provisions in 710203, which guide integrated decision making but don't specifically mention climate change. I'm just wondering if there's any guidance that you'd give to the IAC in relation to that.
Yeah, that's it's very often the case that planning schemes are amended piecemeal rather than in an integrated way. Not that they asked me, but if they did ask me, then I would have thought that if you were changing the purpose, that would inevitably have led to a consequential change to 7102-3. But that said, perhaps the other way of looking at it is that you've got to read 7102-3 having regard to the purpose. So those provisions, maybe they don't need to change, but the lens through which you look at that action might change as a consequence to the change to clause 01.
Thank you. No further questions from the IAC, so I'll hand you back to Mr. Rush. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. There's just one matter that I want to take Mr. Glossop back to. And it really relates to the decision guideline in the Significant Landscape Overlay Schedule 1 that refers to the Coastal Spaces Landscape Assessment Study. I get that name right. And I just want to encapsulate the the timing of this issue, about when the decision guideline came into the scheme, and then your comment, Mr. Glossop, about what the practitioner's guide now says about the reference to background documents. And I just want to put the relevant documents to you in chain and ask you for comments about them. So I'll start with the SL01 as it stands in the scheme today. And I've just downloaded this about 5 minutes ago. So you can see that the current decision guideline, which sits at the end of that schedule, says whether development has regard to coastal spaces landscape assessment study, Plans for 2006, in particular the relevant character area paper.
Yep.
That says it is today.
Yeah.
Of course, and I'll come back to this in a moment, the most recent time that that clause was amended was pursuant to C106 GELG, gazetted 20 Jan 2023. Come back to that. Now, the practitioner's guide as it stands today, and I've just downloaded this about 5 minutes ago, on page 100 under the heading 6511 decision guidelines, says this in highlight. Decision guidelines should relate to the schedule objectives that they serve and any statement of significance if one is present. They may refer to a document, but only if the document is incorporated in the scheme. A decision guideline should not refer to a background document. And of course, the CS-LAS is a background document. And the date of the most recent version of the practitioner's guide is June 2004. So the colour's a bit off, but can you see that on screen?
Yeah.
All right. Now, the genesis of the SL01 can be found in the Municipal Implementation Toolkit, which was one of the documents that makes up the Coastal Spaces Study. And this is document 342. And if I take you to page 42 of that document, you'll see, I should just establish, at that point in time, you can see, that's not the best map, that was the shape and location of the SL01 that was proposed. It's a bit different than it was implemented, but I want to take you to the SLO as it was proposed. It was a draft schedule at that point. You can see applies to the same area, Glenelg River Estuary and surrounds.
Yes.
And if I take you to the decision guidelines, you can see I've highlighted, in fact, there's no reference in the decision guideline to the study. However, it's referenced as a reference document. It has the state overview report, which is one part of it. And then it has the municipal reference document, which is a second part of that study.
Yep.
And that document is dated December 2006.
Yep.
Then if we come forward in time, the next relevant point, apologies, is, sorry, I might not have got the right document in front of me. Just bear with me for a moment, please. Is the panel report for C52. Now, in your evidence statement, you expressed a view that you weren't aware of really what had happened with the subsequent part 1 and part 2 of C52 by reference to a panel report. Have you seen this document?
I have now, yes.
Okay. Now, this is dated March 2011.
Yes.
So 5 years after the study.
Yep.
And if I take you to page 66 of this document, I'll take you up to the top of this part. You can see this was the SL01 as was recommended to be implemented by the panel at that time. And if I take you down to the decision guidelines, you'll see in highlighted in blue, the final guideline is in considering any application for development, the RA shall have regard to matters contained in the municipal reference document, and which is one part of the study, in particular the relevant character area paper. So we're getting to the actual question in a moment, but I need to set these out for you in chain. So the toolkit was December 2006, which was the first iteration of the overlay.
Yep.
It was considered by a panel in March 2011,
Yep.
at which point the reference to the study became a decision guideline, where previously it was not. Things may have happened in the intervening period, but what I want to take you to is the marked up version of the schedule, which I've downloaded just 5 minutes ago, arising out of C106 GELG, which was the most recent change to the decision guidelines in the overlay. And that was gazetted on the 20th of January, 2023.
Yep.
So before the most recent version of the practitioner's guide.
Yep.
And if I take you down to the decision guidelines as amended through that amendment, and I'll highlight it on screen for you. It's this part here. You can see it became what is currently in the screen in the scheme, which is the first part highlighted, which you probably can't read in the green on screen, but you might see it on your own screen.
Yes.
And it took out what is in strike through, which is have regard to matters contained in the municipal reference document, in particular the relevant character area paper. So in that chain, there's been change over time to the decision guideline, but the most recent change to insert what's currently in the scheme was January 2023. And as you've identified, the practitioner's guide now says what it says, that you shouldn't refer to background documents. So with that chain laid out, I just invite you to make any comments that you wish, if additional, as to the relevance of the reference to the paper, the study, as a decision guideline currently.
Yeah. Well, the other date that's not in there in your list is the date of old PPN 13 incorporated and reference document. So that's a June 2015 document. So that's kind of that was an updated version of an earlier one. So 10 years or so ago. So it's clearly the case that at that time, background documents, at the time that the toolkit was in play, and even at the time of the C52 panel, the practitioner guidance would have been different, would have said something different about the role of reference documents in decision making. That amendment that you're talking about, I think C106, is the result of a council planning scheme review, and one of the outcomes of that planning scheme review was acknowledgement that their overlays, in particular their SLOs, didn't reflect practitioner guidance. And so the amendments to the control are in part a consequence of that. And in fact, the language is probably somewhat detuned in the current schedule than of what it was in the old schedule, somewhat detuned. And as I said, look, I think the decision guideline itself is neutral. It's meant to be neutrally worded, and that's what the practitioner guidance says. So it's neutrally worded anyway at the moment. So whether it's had regard, so what that means is the decision maker could say, it's had no regard, but still acceptable. Or it has had regard and it is acceptable, or whatever, somewhere in between. So it leaves it very much as a discretionary test by the decision maker, I think. And that analysis of wording is, I think, as I understood it to be. Yeah.
Thank you. And the final question is whether or not contemporary practice would have any reference at all to a background document, the decision guideline. Are you able to say whether the development of this project, and I am explicitly referring here to Appendix L, the landscape and visual assessment, had regard to the study?
Oh, I believe it did. Yeah.
All right. Thank you. That's all, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. So it just brings us to our scheduled lunch break. Mr. Chessel will be in your hands for the afternoon. I'm keen to hear what you're proposing before we make decisions. I'm imagining we'll be back at 2, but Yes, happy to hear what you're thinking.
Well, we've completed the topics and the materials that were scheduled for today, so we're not proposing to address you in the afternoon unless there's any particular matters that you'd like us to address you on. We are confident that with the timetable as scheduled, we'll complete the evidence throughout the early part of next week and then be in a position to deliver our closing submissions on the Thursday.
Thank you. So that works for the IAC as well this afternoon. So that will mean that we'll be finishing now for the day, and people will be aware we're not sitting tomorrow. So we'll be sitting on Monday and starting at 10 a.m. Back in Clifton's where we are now, plus online. And as I noted this morning, hearing evidence on aviation from Mr. Jennings and on noise from Mr. Dallaire. So and Member Wilkinson, as I mentioned this morning, will be joining us online on Monday as well. And I don't think there's any further business for us to cover this afternoon. So thank you very, very much to everybody for your time. Thank you, Mr. Glossop, for your evidence today. And look forward to seeing everybody on Monday at 10.
Thank you.
Thank you.